are listening to the Weekly Business Hour, and this is Rick Schisler, your host. I want to thank you again for being with us today. Before we get started in this hour, I want to let you know again that a podcast video cast of today's program is available at YouTube as well as Facebook, the Weekly Business Hour page. If you missed something in the first half hour, you want to share it with a friend, that's where you go. Go to YouTube, Facebook, the Weekly Business Hour, and after Wednesday of this week, that'll be available. It'll be the entire show. Also want to thank our show sponsor, onebestconsult.com. That's the number one, bestconsult.com, a great place to go get common sense experience when you have a question about something happening in your business or not happening, as the case may be. Go to onebestconsult.com. Well, today, as I mentioned before we went to break, we have John Stacy, advocate coach. In a soup to nuts conversation, I think it's going to have a lot in it for almost every business, particularly if you have some degree of success and you're ready to move on and move up. And we're going to talk about a roadmap to success issue entitled Mergers and Acquisitions. Can your business grow through a merger with another business or perhaps through the purchase of another business? Lots of options there. And many times people, right, John, they discount the idea that, well, I can't buy another business or merger. What's that? Let's talk about it.
Well, let's talk about it. And Rick, glad to be here today. Let's talk about mergers and acquisitions. But before I get started, I really wanted to talk a little bit about the stats. 2018, $3.9 trillion were invested in the M&A process. Think about that. 3.9 T, that's T trillion. So that's pretty fantastic. But 60 to 70% of those are going to fail. And you know, as you start thinking about failures, a lot of it has to do with they didn't have a roadmap or they didn't follow the best advice out there to be successful. And it doesn't matter whether you're a small business or a large business. There's still what I look at as 8 steps that if we really follow those steps, it increases our odds of being successful. And so many acquisitions fall short of success. So we're going to talk about those 8 things. And in addition to that, just thinking about this, 10,000 people turn 65 every day. I'm not sure if you knew that, but 10,000 people will be turning 65. A lot of those are business owners, and they're going to have to do something with their businesses at a short period of time. And this 10,000 people is going to be going on for about the next 15 years. So huge opportunity. So if you're in a position that you want to buy a company, now is a great time to really be looking. But let's get into the steps on the M&A process that if you follow these, you're going to be much more successful.
Well, let me make a couple comments, maybe kind of back up a second, because it's something that, it's funny, you mentioned $3+ trillion, but I've been a business reader for, 40 years now, 50 years, I guess. Boy, I age myself. But I love to read about big companies. They mess this up so bad to the point that when I read something like IBM recently acquired Red Hat, a big software company, multi-billion dollars, and I've always been a believer that could be a small business and the price may be thousands of dollars, but the same idea. And when I read things like that, and in the back of my mind, I said, I want to sell that stock. and this is no reflection
Right.
on IBM, but so many, and I think you used a number 60 to 70%, don't work. Well, I've read all those stories for so many years. It's an interesting challenge, but also great opportunity, right?
It's absolutely a great opportunity. When you bring up I bring up GE and Baker Hughes. Thought this was going to be the best merger forever, but the fact of the matter is, in a relatively short period of time, it failed. In that particular case, in my opinion, it really had to do not so much with the numbers, but with cultures, and they had clashing cultures. And we'll talk a little bit about those things as we evaluate companies. There's a lot of things you need to look at. It's not just the benefits, it's not just the finance, and they talk about synergy. And synergy is kind of all about 1 + 1 = 3. Well, in a lot of these mergers, 1 + 1 = 1.5. And that's really where the failure comes in. And they didn't follow a lot of these steps, or if they followed the steps, they took some shortcuts. And so I think that ends up being a very important discussion to help people, whether it's in $1 million company or a multi-billion-dollar company, the steps are the same.
Second point I want to make, and be sure our listeners who are typically small business people, if I have a business, say, doing $1 million in revenue, and I've been growing, say I'm 5-10 years in, and been successful, and I want to grow to 2 or 3 million. Because that's either personal or whatever. I mean, I think you got to have some real solid business reasons of where you grow to. But I'm a candidate to buy another business in merging, aren't I? I mean,
Well, you're absolutely a candidate. And, there's a couple different ways you can grow a business. You can grow it organically, and I'm just going to keep doing these things. And I have an office in Houston, for example, and maybe open up in Austin and Dallas or San Antonio, and that's one way I can grow. Another way is really finding someone that is going to be someone that I want to acquire. And so then we can talk about strategic purchases. Actually, I'm working on one currently that it's similar businesses. Products are about the same, but what's going to happen when they come together is that instead of having a couple regional companies, you have a nationwide presence. So that's one of those things that's a strategic purchase. There's also financial purchases. So there's different ways that you can look at what you can do to acquire a company.
and I want people to understand that, again, small businesses, $1 million, probably even $500,000. I mean, these things can be done in the neighborhood. They don't have to be done across the country. But I've actually seen small business on one side of the country merge or buy a business on the other side of the country, geographically 1,000, 2,000 miles apart, and be very successful because of the business they were in, the industries they were in. There was synergy there. So let's kind of start, again, if you're a small business, I hope you'll listen to this and not just think it's the IBM and the GEs and the ones that mess it up all the time, at least historically.
Right.
We're talking to you as small business people, and it's a great way to grow your business if it's done properly. And the key, in my opinion, is we have a process, right?
There's a process.
8-step process in this case. It makes sense.
Absolutely. There is a plan, and you can go out there and research, and there's 6-step processes, there's 10-step processes. If you have a consistent process, though, and you follow these steps, the odds of being successful are extremely high. And so why don't we get started and
Sure.
talk about the first thing, and the first thing is strategy. And, several months ago, we talked about strategic plan. Your business should have a strategic plan. When we start talking about the M&A process and having a strategy, it is what are we looking for? What exactly do we want to accomplish if we are to purchase a company? And that might be financial things. That may be different product offerings. That may be buying part of your supply chain. So there's a lot of different reasons, but you've got to be thinking, what's my strategy? What am I going to accomplish? How much do I want to invest? You talked earlier today about cash flow. How much do I want to invest? How much do I want to borrow? So it's really about having that strategy in place so that I know that when I'm talking to someone, and this goes both ways. If I want to sell my company or if I want to buy a company, I have to have a strategy.
One of those things, and I think there's a great opportunity based on my experience, failure as well as success, is take that strategy and use parts of it as a checklist. And when I look at another business, either to merge or acquire, I've got to have 5 to 10 things, this is my opinion, that company has to satisfy. That opportunity has to check those things off. It's only when I didn't follow the strategy, got emotional, my first deal, and it was not successful. And then on, it worked because I followed it. I learned the hard way, if you will. But having that strategy gives one a checklist, right? To work through, a template or a roadmap, as you've said.
Absolutely, and I think you said one word, and it's emotion. You can't have an emotion about what you're going to purchase or what you're going to sell. Emotions can't be in the equation because when we put the emotions in it, we start making bad decisions because we really want it. And I've seen companies that have been in a position where they've gone out and they've done some other things. They've done their due diligence. They said, okay, it makes sense. And then they decide they're going to go ahead and purchase it. But the reason they purchased it was more emotional because it was the right thing to do. And if they had looked at everything that they had done in their due diligence, they would not have done the deal. You can't have emotion in the transaction.
Well, and I would submit to you that not only they perhaps didn't do what they in their due diligence, but they did not have a good quality process in place, right?
Yep.
When they started.
I would agree.
And I think small, large, it doesn't, medium, it doesn't matter. You screw up this part of the deal, you don't have a map. What happens when we don't have a map? Potential to get lost skyrockets. Well, let's move through this process. This is exciting.
So we've really sat there and we've developed a strategy and what we're going to accomplish. The next step to me, is really identifying targets. So if you're in this business, you know your competitors, you know people that would fit in, that match your strategy. And then it's a matter of beginning to contact these people that you would be interested in buying. And there's some things that have to happen through that process. But there's a number of people that say, okay, I'm interested in this company, this company, and this company, because those companies match my strategy. And by the way, if you want to sell your company, you can actually be doing the same thing. Because if you want to sell, you know that this company or this company or this company are going to be companies that may be interested in buying me just because they fit our strategy.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. And again, back to having that map, you know what you're looking for, the emotions, which tripped me up. So I know that pain. Get out of follow the plan. Just leave everything else out if you can. If you're a good accountant, you can do this. Some of us, we don't have that black and white mind, right?
Well, yeah, and I've got a finance background, so I kind of have that black and white mind. I've got to sometimes watch that emotion. So we've identified some targets. We now need to figure out what's the next step. And the next step really is about information. It's about information exchange, okay? And when it comes down to it, regardless of which way this transaction is going, both parties need to provide information. Most of the information is going to be going from the acquiree to the acquirer, and that's going to be financial information. It's going to be other information about employees. It's going to be information about insurance. It's going to be a lot of basic information. But I'm going to say this initial amount of information is more about financial, and that's because of my financial background. Because what's this information going to be used for? Okay, this information is going to be used to really look at how do I value the company. But through this, we're also going to make sure that we've signed a confidentiality agreement. As any of these conversations start, we need to make sure some legal things are in place. Confidentiality is in place, and submission of a letter of intent, so we can start this discussion process. In a lot of cases, we want to keep this really, really tightly held to a very small number of people. We don't want the whole company to know what's going on either side of it, so we want to make sure that we put some things in place to protect ourselves.
Well, and it makes a lot of sense. And one thing I'm going to comment based on my experience, the quality of the information I get. You know, I had a red flag in that first opportunity I mentioned to you. They ran like 13 or 14 runs to try to produce financials, okay, to button it down. And the guy doing the work was a CPA. He was on staff, and they stacked up seriously. And this were the days where we had the big computer paper.
Right.
It stacked up 5 feet high, and they couldn't tie certain things on the balance sheet down, and that was a red flag. And I should have looked at that stack and said, hey, these people don't know their numbers. They don't. But instead, I said, there's an opportunity because I had people working with me. We could get those numbers under control. But how do you buy something if you don't know what it's worth?
Well, and actually some people, because of emotions, do because they think it's going to fit. But the fact of the matter is, if you can't get to that information, that is absolutely a red flag. And I think that in a conversation at a later date, maybe we ought to talk about what do you need to do to get ready to sell your company? Because there's about 8 things that you can do to increase the value of your company. And I think that that's an important discussion also. We're talking more on the acquirer side today, but there's what do I need to, if I want to sell my company, back to those people that are getting ready to retire, if I want to sell my company, it's my biggest asset. What do I need to do to change some things over the next 3 to 5 years? Because, you don't wake up one morning and say, I want to sell my company today. It's really a thought process that you have to go through, and it's a 3 to 5 year process to really get ready if you want to maximize the value of your company when you exit.
Well, you're right, and it gets down to maximize. You can sell your company. You can wake up one morning and call somebody, I want to sell my business. But the value, that what you'll leave on the table, and I've had some experience with clients doing this and talked them out of it, thank goodness, batting 100 on that or 1,000 on that one. In fact, one's still in business 8 years later, but their value was skyrocketing, and they were going to leave it all on the table. And we're talking about significant money in some cases as a percentage of the value of the business. So I think that's advice well given. Well, John, we're going to take a short break now.
All right.
Allow our sponsors and people to speak to those who are listening. And when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. And again, I hope you will pull out your pad and pencil. I always encourage that. Make some notes. And send us questions if you have any now or after the show. Just send them to Rick at irlonestar.com. But hang in there. We'll be right back with you.
Lone Star Community Radio is looking for those who are interested in hosting their own talk show, with monthly and weekly slots available on Conroe's FM 104.5, 106.1, and on irlonestar.com. Start your own podcast, create your first YouTube channel, and be on TV. Contact Lone Star Community Radio online at irlonestar.com or call the station message line at 936-647-3776 to take your first step into the radio world.
Did you know there are more than 790 abused and neglected children currently in foster care in Montgomery County? Will you help make a difference? I'm Allie Stevens with Casa Child Advocates of Montgomery County. We train and support volunteers to be the voice of children in the foster care system. Kids removed from their home because of abuse and neglect, and we need volunteers just like you to advocate for these children. To learn more about becoming an advocate, please visit CasaSpeaksForKids.com. That's CasaSpeaksForKids.com.
It's all business talk on the Weekly Business Hour every Monday at 11 a.m. right here on Lone Star Community Radio.
You are listening to the Weekly Business Hour, and this is Rick Schisler, your host. We're having a soup to nuts conversation here with John Stacy regarding a roadmap to success, mergers and acquisitions. Well, John, we've talked about strategy development. We've talked about identifying and contacting targets, and also about information request, which is a topic that we need to explore much deeper sometime in the future, and I appreciate your offer. Let's talk about valuation and synergies. Boy, that's an important topic. What do we need to do to assure our success in this area?
Well, we just finished up talking a few minutes ago about providing information, financial information, employee information, historical information, that type of thing. What are you going to do with that information? Well, that's where the time comes that we really need to determine a value. What's this company worth? So there's a number of different ways we can go about do that. But remember, as we're talking about this, there's always two sides of a transaction. There's the buyer and the seller. The seller has an idea what they want for the company. Okay, and in a lot of cases that may be blood, sweat, and tears. And I think most of you know that the valuation of a company has not a lot to do with blood, sweat, and tears. That's the emotional piece of it. I've worked so hard to accomplish this. I want X amount of dollars. Okay, well, that's great. But from a buyer's perspective is what are they going to get out of it? Okay, back to that 1 + 1 = 2. Am I going to be able to get that? And so it comes down to how do I value the company? And so there's a number of different ways you can go about valuing the company. So we can go through a couple of those. There's value of assets. So if you're just buying the company's assets, that ends up being simple, but you're not maximizing the value of the company because you're not taking into account revenue and those types of things. There's discounted cash flows. The challenge with, to me, discounted cash flows is it's a look back. Okay, I'm working or have been working with a client that they've gone through the last couple of years with a pretty rapid expansion. Okay, they've invested all their cash. Back to talking about cash, haven't borrowed money, but they've invested their cash in this growth, and they've gone from about 2 locations to 10 locations in the last 2 years. Well, they've lost a substantial amount of money. When you start looking at discounted cash flows, the company doesn't look like it has a whole lot of value, except the revenue's gone from $4 million to about $8 million in 2020 is our estimate, and we can show that growth, and we can also show the growth in the profitability of the company. So when you look backwards, that discounted cash flow shows a negative. When you look forward, it shows a pretty significant profitability increase. And when I look at the results for 2019, significant improvement year over year. So how do you really start taking a look at those things? And so there's multiples of EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. I think that's probably the most common valuation technique that's used. But with that, and the SDE, which is seller's discretionary income, a lot of small business owners out there take a lot of money out of their company. Okay, that's the fact, and quite frankly, we sit there and we're probably going to take as much out of the company as we can to show that we don't make a lot of profit. Well, from a valuation perspective, that's also a challenge, because. But if you really start taking a look at it and you say, okay, well, if I had a manager instead of the owner, I'd be taking 100,000 out instead of 500,000. I can start when I start looking at that valuation, it really increases the value of the company, because you wouldn't necessarily be taking that much money out, and travel and a lot of those things. So there's a lot of different ways to value the company, but the key is both sides are working on it, and that's before we really get to the next step, which is the offer and negotiation.
Well, there's a lot there, and I guarantee you there's what I call when you do those add backs for small business, they can be very significant, and people need to be aware of them. And there's nothing right. Small business people live out of their business in some cases. I see more and more, though, that people really tend to shy away from that. But again, like you said, you've got to approach this with a 3 to 5 year window if you really want to maximize. Don't have to do anything because you own the business, but I encourage people minimum 3 years, and to clean up things and make sure, because it gets down to the goal. My goal now is to sell the business, right? And I'll do things differently than if I was expanding the business.
Exactly.
Like you mentioned, cash flow, adding locations. Well, John, I appreciate it today. Ladies and gentlemen, John, if people want to reach out to you and get some more information about this, how do they do it?
My email address is jstacy@advicoach, advicoach.com. That's like an advisorcoach.com. It's probably the simplest way to get in touch with me, and I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody and help them through whatever their process is, whether it's buying or selling a company.
This is Rick Schisler, and I'm privileged to be here today having a wonderful soup to nuts conversation. This is a continuation of one we had this past week. This is part 2, Roadmap to Success, how to build your business through mergers and acquisitions and doing it the right way, the successful way. And we're privileged, as I mentioned, to have John Stacy. He's an AdviCoach, has been through this process a number of times with clients and also in his business background and experience. John, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. Really glad to be here.
Well, and we're going to kind of pick up where we left off. You had mentioned, and I think it's great, we talked about processes and checklists and things, and you have an 8-step process that you utilized, and we gotten down through 4, so we're going to pick up, I guess, with the 5th one, and that's offer negotiation. So let's take it away and talk about how to style your offer and negotiation to do the best job possible.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. And just wanted to mention a couple other things as we go here. Read an article in the CFO magazine, one of the magazines that I read, and it's all about mergers and acquisitions. And it's a great article because it does talk about acquisitions are a risky proposition. So it's real important that as we do these planning and identifying targets that we follow this process. It's all about making sure that we have to increase our odds that things are going to be successful. And it's all about, it talks about speed, and it really talks about the bad news is that it can drive some negative behavior as we're going through this. And the reason I bring that up is these processes are all about driving the right behavior, a positive behavior. So let's make sure as we're talking that we're really communicating the best behaviors out there that we can accomplish. We finished, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, that makes a lot of sense to me because one of the things folks I think need to do is make sure that the best behavior is happening, right, throughout the process.
Right, and so we're talking about best practices. What's the best in class? How do they handle these things? And we finished up earlier in the last segment, valuation and synergies, okay? We've collected data, we've gone through and we've done evaluation. We may have looked at discounted cash flows, we may have looked at EBITDA, we may have looked at seller's discretionary income. So as we've looked at that, we've sat there and we've crafted an offer, okay? And we talked earlier, there's two sides to the coin. There is the purchaser who is really evaluating their strategy, evaluating the financials, evaluating the company, and does it make sense? And two, what's the best offer or what's the right offer for this particular company? Remember, as a seller, you're doing the same thing. You want to get X for your company. And it's based upon a number of things. And I think we mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily about sweat equity. It depends upon your product. It depends upon a number of things. So as we're looking at developing our offer, a lot of times there are some industry norms or standards when it comes to some kind of multiple. So we can talk a little bit about multiples, and depending upon the business. So for example, the trucking business may be a smaller multiple. It may be a 3 to a 4% multiple. It can get up, depending upon the age of the company, 4.5. There's some other companies. Actually, I was talking to a friend of mine, and they had been, we talked about a company up in, I think it was Kentucky, a multi-million-dollar company. It was a large company, and it was a medical device, and they were looking at a 14 to 15 times multiple, which was pretty amazing. So as you kind of go through the story of this, they've gone through their strategy. They were in the process of making an offer. As they were looking at the company, this is one of the things where the executives of the company are really excited. This is going to fit in with our strategy. We're really pumped up. When they got there, it was going to take the company, for the profits that they were managing, they had managed to not do stuff with the plant. They had not necessarily upkept the plant. The plant was maxed out. They couldn't grow anymore. So all of a sudden, when you started doing the due diligence and you went there and reviewed the floor plan, looked at the manufacturing process, when they looked at that, all of a sudden they were going to have to be spending millions upon millions upon millions of dollars just to upgrade the plant. And actually, the people that went there that were doing the due diligence went back, and most everybody in the room is saying, this is a great deal. That emotional part, this is really a good deal. Except the people that were there going, well, yeah, but do you realize this? And they went through all the points that said, this is not a good deal. And I will tell you, in a lot of companies, once the executive makes up the mind, oh, yeah, okay, those are hurdles we can get over. Well, guess what? At this point, they listened and they decided not to do the acquisition because the risk was too high. So it really comes down to, as we look at the offer and we start negotiating, what's the multiple, to me, is a real driver.
Well, and that's something that typically when I've been in this situation with small businesses, you can find out certain information about the industry, what's common in the industry, and what's in the marketplace, because that number goes up and down. It could be 4 times today, it'd be 3.5 next week. Things happen regionally or nationally, I found, in some industries that change that selling price or what you can get for a business, and directly tied to that multiple. It's kind of interesting.
Well, at the same time, it's as you evaluate the company, and this goes back to that other discussion as far as those factors that drive your multiple. If you are, as the leader of the company, if you're the decision maker, I'll call it a hub and spoke. If you're a hub and spoke, you got to think about when the company buys you and you're no longer in the company anymore, who's going to make the decisions? If you're the hub, the value of the company goes down. So it's important to realize, from a management structure, you've got the right people in place. That's just one example. I think there's some other ones. Customer concentration. I've worked with someone that, they've got one customer that's 60% of their revenue. Well, when the owner goes away, who's got a great relationship, how much of that revenue is going to stay? Okay, or is that customer going to go someplace else? And so you have some discussions with owners about those types of things. What can we do to change the customer concentration? But those are things which impact our offer, because there's if there's great synergy, then you can add more to the offer. If there's some of these other negatives, there's pluses and minuses. That customer concentration is one of those things that's a minus. Okay.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt about that. I've actually been personally in a situation where the largest customer went bankrupt. A little bit different twist, but the same impact, except at that point you own it. So and it was a large percentage of the business on an acquisition we did. So it hurts either way.
Right. And so as you start thinking about that, the valuation, you start thinking about the assessment, you may be in a situation where multiple people are bidding on this particular business. If it's a high growth industry, there's multiple people interested, that's good for the seller. You've just got to be careful that when you're looking at that you go back to what your strategy is and how much you were willing to invest, and stick with your strategy. If all of a sudden you're going to have to spend way more money than you wanted to. That's where that emotion comes in and says, wait a minute, I can't be emotional. I know it. You know what? It may be a good fit, but it's not a good fit for me today. And that's when you have to back out of that transaction and say it just is not going to work for us.
Yeah, it takes a lot of courage to do that for a lot of people, to really say no or back out.
Well, yeah, absolutely, because you've invested time. You've invested time in your strategy. You've invested a bunch of time in your due diligence. So you've invested this time and people, and it's difficult to walk away. But if you want to have a successful merger or acquisition, you're going to have to make those decisions. You need to know when to hold them and know when to fold them.
Absolutely. What are some of the other areas that are on your checklist for the process?
So as we look through this, then it's really about due diligence. Okay, we've sat there, we've negotiated, we've come to an agreement on a price. There's still more work that needs to be done. We have done this evaluation of the company. Now we've really got to do a very in-depth, thorough review of the organization, and that's not just the financials. It's going to be products, it's going to be properties, it's going to be human resources. One of the companies I'm working with, it comes down to to the degree of benefits. When we merge, how are we going to do this? So it's benefits, intellectual property. How does intellectual property handled? If you as an owner own something personally in this, does that what actually comes with the sale of the organization?
Well, let me ask you this, just kind of back down a little bit off of that, because obviously, I start thinking about all the things that really fall into due diligence, and my head almost explodes and their list out there, 50, 60, 100 items on these lists. And the key is, so people don't forget, is follow the process, follow the list, whatever it is. Be sure you do that. Take that emotion out. I'm going to repeat that forever, because I've been there, I did it myself. I got so vested in doing the process, and had spent the money and spent a lot of time and thought I knew everything. Boy, don't do it. That's that's my tip of the year, tip of my life. But anyway, back to what I'm saying. Got a scenario for you.
Okay.
I'm a dry cleaner. I'm doing $300,000-$400,000 a year in dry cleaning. I got a great location, and there's another dry cleaning in town who has several locations. Pickup stores and the plant and whatnot, and I'm looking because he wants to sell. He's one of your candidates at 65, and it's time to move on, and he wants to sell. What are the 3, 4, 5 keys in due diligence I need to do on that kind of acquisition? What are the key things I need to look at?
Okay, and before I answer that question, there's a time that if you don't know what to do, you buy the expertise. And you just mentioned a list of 60 or 70 items. Yeah, I do have a list from an attorney friend of mine that we've worked together, and it is a long list. Not everything's relevant, but everything is something that you should think about. Get the help you need, again, to increase your odds of success. So back to your dry cleaner, one of those, just kind of thinking about it is structurally, what do you look like? And that's location. So, for example, is your location matching up to others, or does this give them more geographic space without any kind of locations close together? So there's the geographic part of it. I think there's the financial part of it. Understanding you're in the business, okay? Understanding their financials versus your financials. Does what you see really make sense? If you got a 10% margin and they got a 30% margin, and you're running your business pretty efficiently, you're going, well, there's something a little squirrely there, right? People, all your people, and to me, it's not just people; it's about culture. Okay, I've seen some businesses that have been unsuccessful when they merged because you had one organization that was very employees were empowered. They were supposed to make decisions. They were hired because they were good and they were supposed to do their job. The acquiring company, the owner was very authoritative, autocratic. Okay, those cultures don't mix. So you've really got to look at the culture, and then you get into some of the details about benefits. It's vacation time, sick time, all those types of things that are going to impact. Which one do you accept? Health insurance. Does one have health insurance? Does one not? What's that going to impact? So a lot of that. So all the employee-related types of activities. So the three things are really culture to me: culture, financial, and then some of the geographic types of things.
Well, that's a good list. I would mention one thing because I have a background in family history, but the dry cleaning business, you all got to be concerned about the chemicals.
Safety.
What have they been doing or not doing? And that's a huge thing potentially. And I think that I just take a little footnote to our conversation today is that when you buy a business, look at those processes. You mentioned intellectual property, but processes that they have intellectual property, if they're dealing with some hazardous type of materials, as part of their process or whatever, be sure those get special attention, and typically you need to find specialists to look at them for you because that can really trip you up or give you a business that's not worth anywhere near what you bought it on. So I feel looking for those little things that are hidden in the back corner and somebody wasn't doing it exactly. That's a big culture issue too. Maybe we can touch on that for a second, is how people handle those potential, I call them threats, whether it be environmental or intellectual, something that the business is so dependent on that if it goes away or it's damaged or unavailable. I ran in a deal the other day with CPA, right? Tax time.
Right.
And they used a certain software, and that software with the update that Microsoft had done wouldn't function. And this is a national product. And the security aspects of it were not working. And he was shut down for a period of days because that. So what do you suggest? I mean, people need to do, that's due diligence of if I'm acquiring that professional service firm, CPA or whatever. I mean, it's everywhere in business, more and more with technology.
Well, I'm trying to think what a good answer is on that because there's so many different things that every business that we look at is going to be related. You mentioned the chemicals. And I'm thinking, well, that's really all about safety. What are they doing from a safety perspective? If it's a trucking company or an industrial company or a manufacturing company, it's still about safety. But what you have to do with OSHA and OSHA requirements then becomes a real challenge. Things that you don't necessarily have to deal with in a retail environment. So a lot of it has to do with where you are as a company, what industry, what products you have, and do these products all mesh together when you start bringing these two companies together?
And have they been dealing with them in the past? If you got chemicals or even a technology, maybe they're on the outs with their software provider, and you don't know it. I mean, you don't know it unless you're one or two or three people in the company that's dealing with it. And all of a sudden, day one, you go in theoretically and you're disconnected. I mean, any kind of process that is critical to the function of that business, it's something you got to do due diligence up to the time of closing.
Absolutely right, and it's every process. It's understanding what each one of those processes are, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit. But when you do get to a point, it's about integration. Because with all of these things that we're evaluating, we've got to get down to the granular detail. We can't just say, hey, EBIT is this. Oh, that looks good. Let's go for it. You really need to get down to every process within the organization to evaluate where they are and where you are. And are you willing to accept these things? Or if you aren't going to accept them, or you might say, for example, software. This particular company uses this kind of CRM. This one uses this type of CRM. What are we going to do? Okay, this one works, but ours is better. Okay, so what are we going to do longer term? That's a project plan. But you've got to look at all of those things because they're operating their business today. You're operating your business today, and if we want to get 1 + 1 = 3, we've got to understand everything as we put these together.
And there's a cost. In your example of merging those softwares, whether you eliminate one and got to transfer, there's a cost. And I, again, find typically a smaller business, even big businesses, they'll overlook that there's a cost, even if it goes together perfectly. Put down on a piece of paper, because I'm willing to pay X, but I have to analyze what cost. And you gave a great example of a manufacturing and drug deal. That was a major, but there's a lot of small costs. It's like buying a house. My dad, I'll never forget the advice. I bought my first house. He said, well, if you figured out what your extra costs are going to be, and I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I'm not talking about your closing statement. I'm talking about once you buy the house, you need a lawnmower, you need this, you need that. And it was a few $100s, if I remember, but still,
They don't know my wife. It was
know.
a few $1,000.
Yeah. Well, and be sure you do it.
Right.
Let's take. We've got a little bit of time left. Let's talk about the purchase agreement itself. I mean, that's a legal document. So, how do you approach that?
I get a professional to make sure that we're doing it correctly. And so I've got an attorney that we work with. And that's part of having a team when you're doing this, because whether you're buying or selling a company, chances are you need a CPA, you need a tax individual. A CPA doesn't know necessarily a tax expert, right? An attorney, you need some kind of advisor to kind of hold everybody together. That's one of the things I really work on. And I'm trying to think, there's more people, but you got to make sure that you've got the right team in place to be able to help you make the decisions and handle this professionally. So when you look at the purchase agreement, it's going to be an attorney that has experience documenting purchase agreements. What's going to be in a purchase agreement at a high level? It's going to be the very high level is price and terms. Okay, and terms can be a whole lot of different items.
Yeah, there's a lot of room to know and grow, as I say, and when you get down to price and terms. Well, we've made it to the end. We're ready to close our deal, right? And either merge or acquire that business. The point being is we're going to take our business and make it part of another business. What's your wisdom on all that?
Well, okay, so we've gone through these processes. We've kind of got to the point that we're going to close on the deal. And so step 8 is deal closure and integration. So they've been finalized. We've agreed on the price. We're going to agree on when we're going to gain control, what we're going to gain control of, and now it's time for integration. And I think integration is a significant failure point, in which we're going to talk about a little bit later on, because most people don't plan the integration piece until after they're actually closing the deal. And when it comes down to it, if you go back to our due diligence, we've at a point that we think we're going to be doing the deal. There could be some things that kill it, but the project planning for the integration needs to start at that point. The planning doesn't start at closure. And that's one reason that people fail.
Yeah, well, you made an excellent point. Even our off-air discussions that you and I've had about integration and how critical. And if you just stop and think about it, even back to our dry cleaning example. So I acquire this business and they have, say, 15 employees. And I'm over here and I've got my 8 or 10. There's still integration that needs to take place, even if they don't all work in the same place. But we're going to be communicating with each other. There's going to be common things. That's how you make the 3. You're able to do it with less or make more out of the same amount or whatever. And you've got to connect and all the things that go into integration. Even in a simple acquisition of a store or 2 stores, whatever, you've got to make it happen. And it's more than the black and white of changing the forms and doing all this, It's a big deal.
But a lot of owners think that that's all it is. Yeah. Okay, we changed the name on the front door and we're good to go.
Yeah.
Well, we're not.
Yet that lady or those people that work there for an average of 15, 20 years, and they're going to look at the name on the door and say, anyway, but that's
so that the whole integration process really comes down to change management.
Yeah.
Okay, and a lot of people don't look at it from a change management perspective.
Well, and I think as we kind of wind up today's session, the thing is, it's kind of like buying a house. Most of us do that once or twice in our life. I know some people that bought more homes. I think we bought 3 or 4 over the 35, 40 years that I've been married. But the reality is to merge or to acquire another company, for most people, most business owners, is not something you do every day. And you may only do it once, maybe twice in your career. And so it's even more critical that you have a process and that you find experts to help you. And right, I mean,
Absolutely.
it's a one-off.
If you did it every day, that'd be one thing. But if you're going to do it once or twice in your lifetime, it's important to get it's going to cost a little bit of money. But guess what? It will save you so much by having experts do something and involved in it to help you make the right decision.
Yeah, unless you're deciding this is going to be your way, and every once or twice a year you're going to acquire, then you can use the old experience and fail and have success and measure it out yourself. But really encourage people, find people to help you in all aspects
Absolutely.
that you have mentioned, John. John, as we wind up today, you mentioned, I believe, a book that in one of our discussions that you felt was very powerful and could be helpful to people. Tell us a bit about the book.
I've got a friend by the name of Jerry Baltus. He's up in the Milwaukee area, but he wrote a book that's the final act of ownership, and it's selling your small business. It's a quick read. It's a short book, but if you're really planning and thinking about buying or selling a business, I think this is a really good book for people to take a look at. Spend an hour or so reading through it. It'll at least give you a really good idea as far as what you can do or what you need to do to prepare for the sale of your business.
And that's the final act of ownership, selling your small business.
Correct.
Okay, and can you get that on Amazon? I
Yes, you
assume?
can.
Okay, that's a good ad. And last but not least, you've got a big event coming up personally for you and your family. We're all about here at Lone Star Community Radio, all about working with the community, nonprofits, and doing good. So tell us about this event, please.
So it's all about helping the community. We've got the Compassion United fundraising event coming up in Thursday, April 15th. It's pretty exciting. It's something that we're in the process of making a significant change. We've been helping the homeless here and empowering them to get out of homelessness for the last 14 years. We have 5 acres that we're getting ready to develop, and the focus of this is really to start fundraising so that we can do this 5-acre development. So that's pretty exciting. Of course, my wife's involved. She's going to be working on the silent auction. So if anybody has some items that they may want to provide to the silent auction, I'd be more than happy to help them get connected. Again, my name's John Stacy, and it's JSTACY@adthecoach.com.
This is Rick Schussler. I'm the host of the Weekly Business Hour, and we are in the middle, in fact, coming down to the end, I should say, of a wonderful conversation with John Stacy. He's an advocate coach, and we've been talking about developing your own roadmap to success so that you too can do mergers and acquisitions and do it in a way that, as John likes to say, 1 + 1 = 3. I like that expression. It's well done. Well, John, we're down to the final session. We are going to hopefully engage in a great summary for folks who have listened to the other parts, part 1 and 2. Then this kind of brings it all into focus. So where do we start?
Okay, so from a summary perspective, as we talk about the M&A process, I really think there's 8 steps in this process to make sure that we increase our odds for success. The first one's all about developing the strategy, making sure that we understand what we're trying to accomplish, how much money we want to invest, but having a strategy to move forward. It's about identifying. Number 2 is about identifying potential people that we want to acquire. Okay, and there's a number of things that we're looking at from our strategy. So let's identify some companies in our area or in the U.S. or whatever area we're in to acquire. And then once we go through this agreement, then we start saying, okay, let's exchange information. And that's all about getting the right information so that we can start doing our due diligence. Once we have that information, we go through this valuation process, and we've talked about multiple types of valuations. Won't go into them. Go back and listen to the last series. Deal closure. We've made a decision. It's a go. We want to do the deal. We agree on what the price and all the terms are going to be. We develop a purchase agreement. Make sure you have a professional help you. If you don't have the experience, if you haven't done it before, pay someone to help you. It will save you a lot of money in the long term. You finish your due diligence, and then we have an offer. The offer is acceptance, and now we're really into the negotiation. And as we're done, then it's about deal closure and integration. So that's really the first part of the merger and acquisition process. We've got a deal, and we're good to close. Well, now it's time for integration. And in my opinion, the integration is one of those things that is thought about too late in the process, and it's one of the significant reasons that mergers fail. Okay? So you've spent all this time and effort and money and people and resources, and then all of a sudden we get down to integration, we sign the deal, and we're going, okay, well, it's a transaction, we're good to go. Well, guess what? We're not good to go. And there's a reason we're doing this deal, and it's all about creating shareholder wealth. There's some things you put together in the strategy that says, I'm going to do this. And again, back to the 1 + 1 = 3. But if we don't finish this, our acquisition is going to fail. And like I said, 70 to 80% of them do fail. So what are the steps to make sure that we do a good integration? And I can tell you some stories. I had been with the company. I think we had done well over 100 acquisitions over a 5-year period. Wow, a lot of. We got to a point, though, that we thought, number one, anybody we acquired would be successful. And guess what? You still got to do the due diligence. You still have to follow the process. But we really didn't do a great job on the integration piece of it. Okay? So what happened was that was a long-term failure on a lot of these particular companies. And they were $2 to $3 million companies, so there was a lot of small companies that were being acquired. You have to do your due diligence. You have to have a plan. So I put together really 6 steps that we can do, and if we do these in an integration process, we're going to have a successful integration so that 1 + 1 does equal 3, and we can get that synergy, increase the shareholder value the way that we expected.
Well, and I think the difficulty we have in small business, again, and I talk about this probably too much, but small business people, as a rule, don't like to plan as far as really sit down and focus and build a simple business plan, marketing plan, whatever. And for me, simple is 1 or 2 pages. I know you can 50-page, but the idea, I just want them to get started on something, and we work on that a lot. I do with my clients because it's part of that roadmap idea and concept. So I can see the true value in, if I'm going to buy something, then to integrate that 1 or 100 or 1,000 employees into my business so that it all goes smoothly. Because to me, when I visualize the 1 + 1, we've got to the 1 + 1. That's the closing of the transaction. Right. The equals is still up in the air. It might be that way for 6 months, a year, 5 years. But the real work starts, right? Once the closing's done and everybody shakes hands and pops the champagne, now the real work starts. That's my opinion.
Well, you're absolutely right. To me, I say it's where the rubber meets the road. Now is the time, but I also said earlier, we need to start the integration planning a long time before we actually close the deal. Okay? And back to your plan, when I'm working with people that are selling, we actually put, a lot of cases they haven't had a strategic plan. Even though it's late in their life cycle, I still make sure that we put together a strategic plan, because someone that's buying this wants to know where we thought we were going. And so that whole planning process, and it's a 1-page strategic plan. So there's some really good books out there. Scaling Up happens to be one with a 1-page strategic plan. The Rockefeller Habits is another good book. So there's a lot of good books out there to help you, so you don't have I've been in a corporation, I think our strategic plan was like 300 pages. Well, guess what? We did 300 pages, put it up on the shelf, and we were good to go, right? We had our plan, life was good. 1-page strategic plan for small businesses is great because it's something that you can look at. It's something you can work towards. You can talk about the rocks, and we've talked about that in a previous meeting. But that whole strategic planning is critical to success. Whether you're starting a business or you're exiting a business or you're buying a business, that planning process is critical.
Well, just a sidebar here for a second. Having that strategic plan and going through this process that'll increase the value of your business. Because if I'm looking at your business and you bring out a strategic plan, well, I said, man, I hadn't thought about that. It'll change your thinking, your critical thinking potentially in the business. So let's start going through this list. We got 6 items to cover.
Okay, so real quick here. One, the first thing is determine your guiding principles. And these are the principles that are going to direct your management team. It's going to direct you. It's going to be about your strategy, and it's going to include things like, what's the end state look like? What are our targets? What are our priorities? What are our risks? And what are our KPIs? It really comes down to, this is a framework for what we expect to get with this acquisition. Okay, so we got a framework now. It's a plan, or the start of a plan, but it's a framework to lay out to the team that's going to do the acquisition, or actually the integration. The next thing really is, then let's define the integration structure within the organization. Who's going to be responsible for what in the integration? Okay, and what part of the integration are they going to be responsible for? And that's critical. Who's responsible on the finance side? Who's responsible on the system side? Who's responsible on the HR side? Who's responsible for each of these areas? And they need to be involved so they understand what the guiding principles are. Okay, the next thing is really conduct a joint meeting. Okay. And some of this stuff may be confidential because we haven't gotten to a point yet where we want to communicate that this is happening, but there's a small group of people, and we're going to get together and we're going to talk about everybody's roles and responsibilities, the roadmap for what they need to be doing, what are the guiding principles, this is what we're trying to accomplish, so that the team that's involved with the integration, everybody is on the same page. Let's get everybody on the same page, rowing in the same direction so that we can move forward. So at that point, then we evaluate all the risk and develop a mitigation plan. Let's face it, everybody you acquire, not everything's going to be a perfect fit. There is going to be risks. Okay, let's make sure we have a mitigation plan for those risks so that we can address them. Make sense?
Absolutely. I think risk evaluation is a critical thing. I have a theory that I use, the 3 balls in the air risk evaluation, based on experience more than anything else. But the idea is that you just understand. And again, I know some of this, if you're listening to it and you own that dry cleaning operation, you're going to say, well, wait a minute, this is mind-boggling for me. Why, but the idea is that if you check off on all these things, and there's not a lot, but if you take time to think through this, which means taking time outside your business, taking it right. We talk about that all the time.
Yep.
But checking off against these things, and particularly if you can surround yourself, and I'm being repetitive, with experts, meaning the lawyer, CPA, tax person you mentioned, and maybe others depending on the industry you're in.
Right.
Then if you get the right team together, they can help you do this. And the point is that when you do the 1 plus the 1, you're not taking something on that's going to be a white elephant or whatever. I mean, it's going to work, and you'll have a chance to do that integration. So this is good stuff, real good stuff, and I encourage people, pay attention, because there's great opportunities to grow by merger and acquisition. Well, John, what are some of the other factors?
Well, the fifth one is really developing a post-integration project plan. A lot of times I've seen people have a plan in their head, okay? Well, having a plan in your head is not the same thing as having a plan that can be followed, documented, and followed. So it's that team that we put together earlier is to really sit down and make sure we understand. We've already looked at the other company. We understand. We've gone into detail about everything within that company. We've got to really start thinking about how do we map over the things that we're going to be changing. And part of that then is a plan to get from here to here. And that plan may not be in the first month. This may be 6 months. So, for example, depending upon the size of the company, we may continue to operate in a separate nature until we can do all the planning to move the systems over. Okay, and systems doesn't sound like a big deal, but quite frankly, it's huge. It's simple things like email addresses. Are we going to change those? But it's also customer service modules that you might be using. How are you going to transition those if you don't have the same systems in place? But it's really all about putting a project plan, who's responsible, okay, what are we going to do? And the steps, who's responsible, and when does that have to get done? So that we have a detailed project plan and that someone's responsible for, and depending upon the size of the company, there may be a lead that manages the people that are doing that. Depending upon the size of the company, you may need to hire some consultants to come in and do some of this stuff. But they have to own. But then again, you need to make sure they own it. Hiring a consultant is a great idea as long as you make sure they own it, right? And it's really so as I'm sitting here thinking, one of the biggest things, and I've talked about it, is culture. And most companies don't think about the culture aspects of it. And, as you've gone through your experience, do you have anything that you've seen that's impacted your businesses as you've acquired them that if you had thought about culture more, something may have been a little more positive?
Well, I think even in an acquisition, if you're not even trying to merge a business, just acquiring, which I had a lot of experience in doing that, is evaluating the culture. And again, small business people, culture, what is that? And we talk about it on the show here as far as developing a positive, valuable culture in your own business. But that is something I know early on that I was not sensitive to. And this kind of gets to what you and I have discussed about fit. I mean, I was trained, I grew up in a family business. I had a culture with me of what I felt good business looked like and how it should be run and how people should be treated and da-da-da. And then you buy a business and they've got X number of people, or you build a business, but you buy it and you acquire it and they're not fitting your culture. So there's a lot of potential for issues to arise that people need to be aware of. And again, most businesses, not all, it's about people. So when you acquire a business or you merge a business, people should be way up the list to evaluate the people, not just if I like them or don't like them, but evaluate people, the customer, the vendors, but the people. And we're going to be able to fit with these people, or are the people not important? And there are a handful of businesses where few employees produce lots of revenue, especially in the technology area. Then maybe it's not so critical, but yet you're probably going to have one or two that know how it all works, and you need to make sure they fit in what you're doing, or that you can bring them around, or otherwise you've got to assign a risk value to them that maybe is higher than you want to deal with.
So as you start talking about that, some of the things that we do from a strategic planning process is really start defining values. What are your values as a company? I like to say, values drive culture, culture drives behavior, and behavior drives results. So if you want to drive results, really understand what your culture, what your values are. And so it's not, when I say culture, it's really, a lot of it has to do with the values of the company. And if you don't look at that, or if you don't understand the importance of that, then the odds of failure are higher. I was talking to a company, and it was as far as some things they want to sell in 18 months. Okay, well, so we had a long conversation, and I started bringing up values, and they said, I don't care about values, I just want to sell the company. Well, that's a little bit of a challenge, because if the people that are buying it, if they don't understand, then it's a little harder for them to understand. And as I sit here and talk, I've come from really more of a financial background a number of years, and numbers are numbers. It's black and white, right? So it took me a long time to figure out that it's not just numbers, it's about the people. And understand it is about the people. It's about the change management as we go through this, because part of this is the communication plan. How are we going to communicate as an organization this transition to both sides of it? And change management to me brings up a picture of, and I can't draw here, but I'll draw in the air, kind of the transition trough. Okay, there's a transition curve, and basically change, you're at this point and you want to get to here. Well, you can't go from here to here. No one makes that transition. There's always this downward and upward to get to this point. And so what our job as leaders is to minimize this trough and get that through that as quickly as possible, because everybody's going to go through the trough. And some people are going to get to the bottom of the trough and say, hey, I'm out. I don't want to go through this transition. But it's our job to make sure we go from here to here as quickly as possible. That's part of our job in the integration process, is to make sure that we have a communication plan and understanding what we're going to be doing with all employees, communicate to them, and And then that includes staffing, retention plans. In some cases, it may be stay bonuses, and so there's a lot of different things that we have to think about from a planning perspective. And then some of those things, organizational structure. Two companies coming together. You would think that the acquiring company is going to take all the primary jobs, right? Well, that doesn't happen all the time, because part of this evaluation process is evaluating people. So the larger companies, there's going to be some intermixture of different leadership. I was talking to a friend of mine recently out of Clearville. He didn't know this. He's been with them a year or so. His company got acquired. Well, actually, no. His company acquired another company, but the acquired company, the CEO, ended up being the CEO, not the CEO of the acquiring company. He has no idea what's going on. He's been left out of meetings, and he manages a number of people across the U.S. And so, do you think this is a productive environment? I guarantee you, there's more talk at the water cooler talking about what's going to happen than what do I need to do to perform today. So we can address a lot of these things as we look at our project plan.
Well, I think that's an important thing, because it is all about people, and that is a major point in any kind of discussion about acquisition or merger. It needs to be right up there in the top of the list, in my opinion, because you're acquiring people, whether it be 1 or 100 or 1,000, as I said earlier, because depending on the business and the importance of, that's one reason to make the acquisition, is you get the people and the plant or whatever to grow your business, and people are definitely part of that equation. So it does you no good if they're not the right people for your particular business. What are some other points? We're kind of wrapping up now that you would like to make in summary.
Well, I think in summary, we've talked about the 8 processes over the last couple of weeks as far as what we need to do. And it's, to me, I'm a planner, but it's all about planning for the future, planning for success. If you don't plan for success, you're not planning for failure. Does that make sense? Somehow I wasn't exactly right. However, it really comes down to planning, making sure that when you evaluate the company, you do a fair evaluation, pay the right amount. One of the reasons people fail is they paid way too much for the acquisition and they get underwater, but they didn't follow their plan because they only want to invest X amount of dollars. So throughout those processes, through the negotiation, but the key thing to me then becomes planning the integration. It's not just a tactical plan, it's a strategic plan on how do we move from, whether you're buying one company, how do you move from one owner to the next, or how do we integrate? What's the plan? What's the people plan? What's the communication plan? What are we doing on day one? There's all these planning pieces that need to be in place so that we can begin executing. Make sure you build a team. Internal, because there's 2 teams. There's the internal team, which is the project, really developing the project plan to integrate. And then there's this team of experts that you need to help you because you don't have the expertise to do some things. And that's, the tax specialist, the CPA, the attorney, those types of people, because it's important to get the right expertise to help you have a successful integration.
Well, and again, that expertise, I can't overstate that. And again, that's hard for a small business, just to hire experts, to hire a lawyer, hire a CPA, just in general. But to say, hey, I would like to acquire a business or merge, and now I've got to hire a team of people. That's one of the good reasons to have some of that team in place, the good lawyer, the good CPA, tax advisor,
Absolutely.
People you've used, because then you know who they are, what they can do, what their limitations are. And I've dealt with that in an acquisition where they replaced members of the team. Very wise on their part, because they weren't really geared for this kind of work. So it's having a good team, not only internally but externally, is very, very important. Well, John, we've covered a lot of ground. I deeply appreciate it. And again, I think, as far-fetched as it may sound to you, if you're listening to this program about growing your business through a merger and acquisition, it's available. Small businesses need to pay attention to that. And you make the wonderful point statistically how many thousands of people in this country are reaching the standard retirement age. And it may be 66, 70, but there's so many and so many of these people own small businesses. And so those businesses are going to be up for sale. I see it. I hear about it. So why not prepare yourself if you want to grow your business? That's a big if, because you got to focus and dedicate yourself. Prepare yourself.
But it may not be if you want to grow the business. It's if you want to prepare the business for your exit. And it's one of those things you need to plan now. 5 years out, we'll say 3 to 5, but 5 years out, you need to be thinking, what do I want to do? When do I want to go to the beach? Or what do I want to do when I retire? And I can tell you, I've talked to some people about, well, what are you going to do? And I go, what are you going to do when you exit your business? I'm going to just die. Well, I guess that is a plan, but that's not a plan that most of us want to live up to.
Yeah, and you make a point. I have an example in my career. I was blessed. I felt it was a blessing to get called in with a couple. They were, in their early 70s. They'd worked hard. They built up this business over 10, 15 years. It was a new business for them. They were from out of the country, come here, and they were the leading provider in this region. But what had happened is all of a sudden, two things happened. One is they decided they wanted to retire because they had children, grandchildren living spread out literally around the world. So that made a lot of sense, right? Great goal. But the second thing that happened is because of economic times and so on and so forth, their sales in the last 12, 16 months literally almost went vertical. And it fit because of certain economic situations, their business does better. It's really one of those, it does better in bad times, so it's kind of unique. But you projected it out a couple of years out, and I talked them out of selling the business. I said, I know you want to travel. Well, let's talk about they had built up no management team, right? They had 30, 40 employees. In fact, the person that had the set of keys when they were gone was the janitor. Well, because he came from their country and they knew him. But that was his position all the way to the bottom. But when they left town, if you want to get in or whatever, you had to talk to him. But I talked him out of it, and that business just blew up and became worth many times what it was worth based on the history to that point.
But they ask an expert like you to be able to tell them or show them how to make the right decision.
And in that case, they had a CPA that really wasn't qualified to work on this kind of deal. They had hired a broker that had the proper connections in my evaluation to sell it. But gosh, don't do it now. Try to see if there's a way you can make 2 or 3 more years and then put those numbers together. And that's what they did. And they walk away with a lot more money. Great. I mean, a lot, like 10 times as much.
Great story.
So that was significant, but you got to prepare. So, well, John, thank you so much. If people want to reach out to you and talk to you further about the topic, what's that?
JSTACY, there's no E in it, JSTACY at ADVICOACH, like advisorcoach.com, JStacy at ADVIcoach.com.
And John, I know you've got a very special event coming up that's personal here in the Montgomery County area to you, and I want to give you a chance to mention it on the air.
Real briefly, Compassion United, we've been helping the homeless, empowering the homeless to get out of homelessness for the last 14 years. We've got an event coming up April 15th, Thursday, April 15th. We're excited for this gala fundraising event and would like for you to come. Any questions, just contact me.
And that's at your email address, jstacy
at avacoach.com.
Okay, well, good luck on that. And last but not least, you and I have a kindred spirit in that we believe in continuous reading and trying to understand. You've got a book you brought with us, and I almost forgot to mention it, but it's a great opportunity for anybody that would consider acquiring or merging their business.
This is a real quick read. The Final Act of Ownership, Selling Your Small Business by Jerry Balthus, a friend of mine up in Milwaukee. It's a short read. It'll give you a good idea on what you need to do and what to prepare. But with knowing that, it's still important to get professionals to help you do what you don't have the expertise today.
Well, John, that's a great way to end this program. Again, thanks for the soup to nuts conversation, a roadmap to success, mergers and acquisitions. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of this program. But we'll continue the show, so please stay with us, and we'll be right back.
OneBestConsult.com, a community of small business owners where you as an owner can find answers to the most pressing business questions you have. Not sure who to turn to when you have a challenge in your business? Turn to the folks at OneBestConsult.com. That's the number one, bestconsult.com, where you can always find advice you can use based on common sense business experience. Join our community of like-minded business owners at onebestconsult.com.